All right, thanks. Welcome back. Our next guest is Gabe. Thank you for joining. Um, do you want to maybe just give a bit of a background about yourself and what it is you do?
Sure thing. So particularly earlier when I got a chance to listen in, I think it was around when Scott was on, uh, we focused a bit on coming up as a sysadmin, and that sort of touched my heart because that was my route into security as well. So started out, my first real stint in tech was doing support for a Lotus Notes system I'd never ever seen before, but hadn't blagged my way into because I had no idea what Lotus Notes was and thought it was something else entirely. And from that, I ended up into sort of a general sysadmin trajectory once I got out of that particular sector and ended up in heavy industry. Heavy industry was really eye-opening as to how business works because and the role of technology in business because really didn't matter as long as the kiln kept pumping out concrete and cement, cement specifically. But also that let me be a sort of a old school bastard operator from hell in terms of power over the local area because they needed someone local far away from corporate IT who could actually get things done and fix things and SCADA networks and stuff like that. And so that gave me a lot of room to grow, which I took both hands. Um, but that also is what led me into security. Primarily because the previous guy who I replaced had booked a security course before he quit. Found out I loved almost every aspect of it. From there, I've sort of taken a view into, well, from there I actually went into audit briefly, looked at a lot of levels of the business and a lot more than just your traditional security stuff. They really tried to multi-skill us and also sort of indoctrinate us in a sort of worldview because I went to 14 countries in 2 years. Landed here effectively when I left, did some time in charity, have run major projects, and now I do effectively enterprise cloud security architecture and consultancy, but all internal stuff. I'm blue team all the way. I've briefly been a supplier in the past in terms of consultancy and stuff like that, and I've done some contract work, but most of my time I've been the defender type.
Awesome. So I see you mentioned cloud. Um, what sort of different, and you also mentioned you came from the admin background. Like, what sort of the biggest challenges facing cloud that many people perhaps don't realize when they move to cloud?
Well, the common answer and accurate in 99% of cases that you have when someone just says go do cloud is that they take a lift and shift approach, which just doesn't work because
Yeah,
cloud engineering is different.
yeah, totally.
Testify, brother. I completely agree with that. Moving a crappy app from on-premise to the cloud just means you have a crappy app running in the cloud, right?
Yes, usually with a completely different attack surface that you no longer understand.
Perfect, because you've disabled security in order to make it work, yeah?
Internally, probably you did.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the one view that I take a look at cloud is like open databases, and to me, this is perhaps the pinnacle example of where I feel that security is often taken a back end with the whole drive into cloud in terms of architecture point of view. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it depends heavily on a lot of factors. Uh, but let's going just thinking about some of my own experiences. I think, well, I'm firmly of the opinion, so starting out here, I'm firmly of the opinion that as a industry and particularly as a community, we are vastly adept at shooting ourselves in the foot when we talk to the business, and we always have been. And you know all the theories about security as teams who say no and all the other fun stuff. And one of the things that we've said that for most of the last decade is no to cloud.
Right.
While cloud is still happening. So we often, in a lot of cases, set up situations where we weren't properly engaged in cloud, or when we were properly engaged, when that started to happen, you still had the case that the team was not resource skilled up or aware of what helping someone learn how to manage cloud securely looks like, so they weren't in a good place to help out. So I would definitely say that in a large number of businesses, that pattern happened, and therefore security is sort of on the back end. But I would say that you shouldn't overlook the aspect that we're getting so many things wrong in the cloud too, simply because they're not only is it a constantly evolving platform, but many things don't have safe defaults. That's just the infrastructure is so complex that there's no set of defaults that will be safe and meet the demands of the user base for whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
But coming back to the default, so like one example that I think that the tool sets failed users is open databases. So if you take a look at like the likes of Elasticsearch, when it first came out, the default was wide open and that's it. You had to pay to get extra security around authentication and HTTPS. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's bonkers, but it's the way our economy works, essentially.
Yeah.
It's both depending, I mean, it depends on the motive for developing the tool, of course. If it's a profit motive, probably not going the open source route nearly as much, obviously, but you would often be looking at something where, as you can say, deploy security by paying extra money there. If it's open source, the various areas of social pressure and praise that the community is good at throwing about on Twitter, and I'm also tongue-in-cheek about the praise bit of Twitter, is often enough to drive people in a given direction or drive people away from a given direction. Take a look at all of the people sticking their heads in the sand around various open source projects in the last few years and claiming that certain ridiculous features are simply by design.
Yeah, it is a worrying factor.
It's horrible, but it's the way people are, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to engage at all levels of the stack, at all different types of people.
So is there a problem though with the idea that this is not a dev problem, this is a DevOps problem or even an ops problem? Is it sort of kicking the can around between the different traditional IT teams? Because you hear the idea that basically hire a full stack developer and all of this goes away. Is that accurate?
That's a lot to unpick. So let me first make sure I understand correctly. Posing the question, we're talking about the responsibility shift from maintaining, managing, securing cloud into a DevOps team as a possibly just being a kick of the can from developers, and it's just sort of making it someone else's problem, but not actually doing anything to fix the root cause.
Yeah, essentially. Okay. Is that an accurate sort of assessment of where some businesses are, or?
Well, yes, for some businesses, but that's a very vague statement. So absolutely, people can get it wrong, but I am firmly of the belief that that is the model to go for. So I do not think it's kicking the can.
Okay.
I have seen phenomenal models because, I mean, if you think about it, how do I phrase it? The most amount of cost that any given application incurs in its lifetime is after it's built.
Yes. Yeah, agree. There's an IBM study that holds that up.
Absolutely. Similarly, that's IBM study from 2010. I don't know if it's the same one, but IBM did a 2010 study too that shows that the cost of fixing security bugs is something in the order of 90 times the cost of anything pre-prod once it's in prod.
Correct. Yeah. Again.
So those things, developers are not there to maintain stuff the same way because most organizations don't hire a developer and say, for the rest of your life, you're going to be maintaining this product and nothing else. That was a pattern back in the day, but it was a horrible pattern, and we know that many issues happened with it too. So instead, the developers are going to get tasked onto a new project, and someone needs to make sure that while either they're making changes, updates, whatever, you still maintain and update the cloud infrastructure along at the same time. So you really want a dedicated stack of now SREs, but sysadmins of old or DevOps or whatever you want to call them, sitting along most of your app teams, not necessarily reporting the same way.
Right.
Also, do you see companies approaching cloud in a totally ignorant manner? I mean, some companies, I think, just simply assume that, oh, it's someone else's infrastructure, so therefore I don't have to worry about things like network security and all that. That's all handled for me, and totally oblivious to the whole kind of notion of shared responsibility model.
I hear people talking about that, but I haven't really seen anyone stick their head in the sand that far deeply myself. At least not comprehensively. You're always going to have some people who think that way, and I'm sure there's tons of people who have made that as a budget decision and justified it. I would argue they probably know better.
Well, that's actually encouraging to hear. So it sounds like a lot of companies are going into cloud with some decent level amount of knowledge, which is good.
My question is have they tried it once, got hurt, spent a lot of money, and now are trying it again? Do we see we kind of see the detritus of failed cloud from the security perspective, of course, when sensitive data is breached. But on the other side of the fence, are we getting the numbers right, Gabe? Like when you estimate the cost of doing cloud, it seems to me, and this is just my perspective from being a guy that looks at bills, it's what's projected is never anywhere close to what the actual costs end up being.
Cost management, well, not my particular discipline.
Yeah.
I prefer to build tools, and those tools usually cost money. But I have been in positions to manage large budgets in the past too, too much to my annoyance sometimes. But I'm very happy that this is the first role in years where I have no direct reports. Cost management is a huge and undermanaged discipline in cloud. So a company may understand shared responsibility coming in to a mild degree. Like they may say, "Oh, Amazon's secure," and they'll get their PCI controls wrong still, but they'll at least have got some concept of needing something to replace the firewall in the cloud, and they learn of what a security group is. It doesn't mean they configure it safely, but there's some clue. But companies constantly fall down on cost management. It is very possible to manage a cost. It needs dedicated review and time and careful use of different types of instances. Also, a lot of different providers now have different plans depending upon committed spend and stuff like that. But that requires going into that, knowing about those tools, or being big enough so that your cloud suppliers tell you about them.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, and what about the new approach, which I've heard and seen recently, is the hybrid model? Hybrid model. Do you have any sort of insights into that?
You mean a hybrid model for what? Infrastructure application? What are we hybridizing?
Right. So my understanding, and this is where a term, it's like I think a relatively new term. So instead of having all your infrastructure in cloud or all your infrastructure on-prem, you have kind of some of it in the cloud and some on-prem.
Well, I don't think it's a new model. It's the model most companies first started out with. And it's all about designing for so thinking of a better way to answer this actually. So it's all about designing for the use case, the business use case you have to begin with. You don't go to the cloud to save money, because that's a horrible way to go about it, because it doesn't save money in the long run. Not if you're doing it the right way, in my opinion. You go to the cloud to achieve certain benefits or scalability or flexibility that traditional IT has never been able to deliver on premise. That doesn't mean traditional IT and traditional infrastructure doesn't have a role. Doesn't mean that you would only certainly consider extending parts of that out to the cloud. And absolutely, when you look at it from an infrastructure perspective, aka traditional IT services, yeah, there's huge value in going hybrid, because if you're sorry, there's huge value in going hybrid if you are an established enterprise with an established tech stack that you have to maintain, because the chance of you being able to migrate all that technical debt out of the cloud safely is probably nil. And because there's also probably a lot of benefits to maintaining your on-premise tech stack for various reasons that could go from security to performance or anything like that. But I wouldn't necessarily marry any concept of marrying my infrastructure to a new product I was building. I would keep that entirely separate and have very special ways of administering or doing it. Because why would you want to link? The cloud gives you the ability now to effectively build a new environment whenever and wherever. Why would you want to try? Why would you want to expose what you're delivering to the attack surface of today's modern corporate network?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think, the promise of Office 365, all cloud exchange works up until you find those integrated business applications that turn out to be critical and require an on-premise exchange server. And given that scenario, I have a lot of sympathy for organizations that don't make the investment in training their IT teams on cloud and cloud platforms and just expect digital transformation to happen. Have you been in that situation where you handed them a bill for, before we even start this, I need these skill sets, I need these tools, I need, I need. Is that a conversation that's happening?
I'm certain it's a conversation that has happened, and I'm certainly aware of some cases where it's happened in organizations I've worked in. I've never personally been involved that early on, despite a lot of campaigning to try to do so. When I was heavily involved in a number of cloud migration projects some years ago, I was I was involved, but even then I was usually involved later than I would like, even with full agreement from every senior stakeholder on the role of security in it. It just seems to be the nature of organizations, and in this particular case, sometimes organizations are also perpetually disorganized.
That's I think a really accurate state of the cloud, that it seems like the balance between either you've gone ahead and hired a guy like yourself, a cloud architect, cloud security architect, lots of experience, or even hired a consulting firm to get you there, and then the business doesn't really want to understand or comprehend what the end state or the vision of it is, and then back again, the vision of the business just doesn't line up with the skill set of the team. And it seems to me that a good project manager for a cloud or digital transformation project is really going to have to look at both of those and actually get those business requirements and align them to the cloud requirements. Is it your opinion how does it fall apart then? Because we've seen kind of a lot of cloud messes.
Who supplies the project manager?
Yeah. Oh, okay. I think that
So
you nailed it there.
if the consultancy is supplying the project manager, you often are in for a world of hurt. I'm not throwing stones at consultancies in this one.
Right.
It's the fact that the nature of engagement, the nature of driving something this intricate forward needs someone who has a lot more organizational knowledge than your third party is going to be able to do on their own. There's an overwhelming belief sold by the consultancies who fail to deliver this sometimes that you can hire someone to do the migration in a pain-free fashion. And I've seen some truly horrible pitches and business cases and torn them down in those times too. And I've seen some with really good consultants too. But given how hard it is to hire really good people, and given how many people are out there in the middle tier of the consultancy market and the value-added reseller market,
Yeah.
There's a high chance that you may or may not get the right people.
Yeah. And then when you don't, I mean, ultimately, it's those people that you're going to rely on for delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just, the costs escalate, because the worst thing about a cloud project is a 3/4 implemented cloud project and then a change of the project team or a change in the business requirements.
Well, I think that you have to always plan for a change in the business requirements.
And anticipate that it won't look like anything that it started like.
Well, no, I mean, it's if you it's the nature of the beast. Some of the, I'm not going to name names, but some of the major cloud platforms are effectively still in beta. They change, capabilities change, design requirements change. You may have to re-architect or refactor the network design 6 months into a project to take advantage of a new feature, or because you find out about a limitation. That happens.
That's kind of insane. That's like building a house on ground that you're not even sure what's under the sand, right?
Not if you're doing it in a completely managed fashion.
Right. Okay.
But I'm talking about established teams who are building and supporting this. And I'm not talking about somebody who goes in and logs into a switch to reconfigure every single port to be in a different VLAN or apply a script to do that to 20 switches and hope it all works. I'm talking about when when you are actually going cloud native, when you're deploying your instances as code, when you're designing your network as code. And so what you're doing is you're changing Terraform code or something like that. And
right. Okay.
And I don't mean you. I would
No.
love to play more with Terraform. I don't mean you, but I would love to play more.
Yeah. God, no. Then something is seriously wrong with the organization.
But yeah, you get the point then.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but it also means, but that's not because that is, so that's just a side effect. The point I'm driving at is that because that's the nature of the beast, then the organization is used to that type of fast delivery, which is why you really do need to be working closely with the business as it's delivering to be able to continue to shape that journey, because the change can easily be driven by someone high up or someone or a customer or someone saying, give me this feature.
Yeah.
Often the way. Okay, Gabe, we are now out of time.
Okay. I would like to say one thing because I failed to say it in my intro.
Please do.
I'm also the president of the Information Systems Security Association here in the UK.
Wow. Fantastic.
So, I've been doing that for the last 6, 7. Anyhow, I've been the president for the last 5 years or so. I'm finishing off my term next year, I hope, and moving on to give myself space to hopefully do a bit more speaking, getting out there instead of herding a lot of cats to run a bunch of events. If anyone is London-based or UK-based and is in London next week, my closing event of the year is on the 12th in the evening in Finsbury Square. Just Google ISSA UK Christmas or something, because I don't have the URL in front of me because I didn't prepare.
Brilliant.
But I'll tweet it out on InfoSec Pro. But yeah, by all means, check it out. I have to put the final speaker up, but it's an evening thing, and come along. But yeah, so that's that, and thank you.
Yeah,
hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant, Gabe. Thank you for your time. Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Thanks, Gabe. Cheers.